Good morning, good morning.
How are we doing? That applause ended much too quickly for my taste. Can we get that started again, please? Thank you. We were busy watching Germany get knocked out of the World Cup backstage. Are any of you paying attention? Any fans of Germany here? Any fans of Mexico here? Mexico went through. All right, Korea won. They beat Germany 2-0. Anyway, what a pleasure to be here. Ed, thank you for inviting me to come.
Happy to have you.
So we're going to try and do something a little bit different today, and we'll see how it goes. So we are going to interview each other. I'm going to interview Ed, and he's going to interview me. I'm used to being on one side of that, and you're used to being on the other.
That's true.
So let's take a shot, and we'll see how it goes. Why don't you go first?
I will go first. So most of you, I hope, know that Mike has done a couple of things in his broadcasting career, and because of that, and I just wanted to mention this before we got started, that him and Mr. Golick were just announced to be in the Radio Advertising and Radio Broadcasting Hall of Fame. So I wanted to say congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we just found out about that at the beginning of this week, and it's a wonderful bookend to what was a magnificent 18-year run, and we will go in November, and so I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a good party. You should come to that.
I will definitely make a point to come to that.
Thank you.
So, you know, as his journey has gone along on ESPN and all the things that he's done for us, he now has a new show, which I hope you all know is Get Up. And it's been a show that's been very much so talked about. It's in the press. So the first question I wanted to ask is, after a start that was highly watched and highly looked at, you're about now almost 2 months in. How do you feel about how the show's going, and how do you feel about where it's going next?
Yeah, I feel great. You know, this is a mammoth undertaking. We launched a 3-hour live morning show on ESPN. So we've walked into the most competitive, what I believe has now become the most competitive day part in the industry, and we're trying to create a new option for people in the mornings, and that takes an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of work. But there isn't any question what the first step is, and that's creating a good show. That's my job, first and foremost. Michelle Beadle and Jalen Rose and an extraordinarily large and talented staff and I have taken on the challenge of creating this show from nothing. Sort of, we had a template in our minds, a vision of what it would be. We went on the air April 2nd, and I think it's terrific. We have, I think, each week gotten a little bit better, a little more comfortable. We're figuring it out as we go. And look, sometimes there are parts of doing that under a microscope that can be challenging. But overall, I think it's been terrific so far. I think it's ahead of where I had it envisioned in my mind as far as the content is concerned. And the most important thing is that I've learned over the course of my career is that the most important relationships that we develop, first and foremost, are with the people in our audience. You make a connection with people who are watching. And then with our partners, and we are seeing increasing, and obviously this is your area, but increasing numbers of terrific business partners that are interested in working with us. Had some terrific meetings of late. We have a lot of opportunity for that. So I would say, so far so good. I think when the football season arrives, we're really going to be primed for that, and I feel really good about how it started.
You know, it's an interesting thing. A lot of conversation around what the ratings were versus what was there before and all that kind of stuff, because that's what people focus on. And what we've seen is the ratings begun to rise, which we're really happy about. And just as important, we've seen the rest of how Mike and his team and how the show shows up in social media to be extraordinarily fast growing. In fact, you know, we just kind of took a look at it today. I saw the guys from YouTube up here, and that was great. Nice to see our ABC and ESPN brands up as part of the YouTube story. Doubling of YouTube views for Get Up, now nearly 12 million a month. So the way we're kind of thinking about how we market and sell and all of that relative to Get Up and all parts of ESPN, frankly, is that it's an experience that you have when you're with ESPN. It is not about where you are. It is just simply where you are with ESPN. And on YouTube, this show is now doing 12 million views a month. We expect that to be in the 20 millions relatively soon. So when we sell it, we just sell it as part of ESPN. It is not about by YouTube, by SportsCenter, by this, by that. It's simply by Get Up wherever it appears. And the fact that we've got it measured has made it helpful to us as we speak about how fans consume it. And I think that's an advantage. I would also say that's where I think the business is going to have to go. Because capturing all the viewers and all the impressions and then demonstrating that they work, that's where the industry wants us to go, and that's what we're spending our time on. And it's great to have talent and commitment the way we do from Mike and the team with our advertisers, and that's a big
Well, that's the most important thing that we do. I mean, we don't have a job. When I speak to kids who are in colleges and interested in broadcasting, I say you have to understand that a huge part of what you are doing is you are developing a business relationship. You were creating a business. We didn't create a show. A show is a vehicle. We created a business. It is in its infancy right now, and I have extraordinarily high hopes for where it's going to go. And I think the point you just made is a really important one. When I started out, I've been doing this 30 years, 21 of them at ESPN, and you've been at ESPN about that long as well. Yep. We've seen enormous changes. There was a time when everything was divided up. There was the television product. There was the radio product, which I was a part of primarily initially. Then social came. There was the magazine. Now we're really producing content that is meant to be consumed everywhere. Yep. And the unique thing, let's not bury what you just said, our ability to now compile all of that, to calculate all of that in a way that really is industry leading, I think has been critically important for us.
It absolutely has. I think one of the things we made a lot of noise about in the upfront was there's a lot of conversation about SportsCenter. How's it doing and what's its ratings and is it, all the highlights and all that stuff. And by taking that particular brand, which is a landmark brand for ESPN, and moving it to, for example, Snapchat, 3 million people a day on Snapchat, SportsCenter, 3 million a day. That's a huge audience. By the way, 75% of it under 24. So I think that audience is not necessarily the audience that's watching SportsCenter on, let's call it linear television. But it is increasingly how we're thinking about that and how the marketplace is thinking about it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I have seen in recent years is that the world isn't changing as much as it is evolving. It's just evolving at a bit of more rapid rate than we have been accustomed to in our lifetimes. And so you have to be able to adapt with it. And I think, we are definitely thinking about, as we plan a show from the side of it that I come from, as we plan a show, we think about which things are going to work, which can we put out there socially that we think will resonate. You look at the term snackable, which I think is overused, but I think is critically important, is one of the things that we do take into consideration. So with that thought in mind, what would you consider at this point to be ESPN's competition? How do we view that, and how do we differentiate ourselves from them?
I think we compete with just about everybody. We compete for share of mind, right, and share of screen, let's just say. And because of that, it's not necessarily the traditional folks only, or is it, the non-traditional, if one wants to call it that, Google, Facebook, YouTube, all of that. I think we compete across every part of the entertainment marketplace, not just the sports marketplace. In fact, if we can continue to position ourselves, which I think we have, as being both sports but also entertainment, being digital but also linear, being an experience, that's where I think we're going to win. And I think we're on a very good path for that. And I think about the kind of content and the kind of, let's talk about you had on the show today, right?
Yeah.
It was a mix, Nick and Ice Cube.
Right.
So that's an example of bringing in new people. So I want to ask you a question, if I can. So what's it been like, Michelle and Jalen, and that chemistry, and how does that work for you, and what are you trying to do to keep making that something new every day?
Well, chemistry is something, the way I've always described it, chemistry is an indefinable quality, but I can explain it. So let's just use you and me, for example. If the two of us were doing a show and we did not have any chemistry, then the show would be Mike plus Ed, whatever I'm bringing to the show plus whatever you're bringing to the show.
Which is probably what we have right now.
Right now. What you are witnessing right now is Mike plus Ed. Yeah. If we have enormous chemistry, then what the result of that is Mike times Ed. Mm-hmm. You make me better than I could otherwise be. You increase what I am more than I could, disproportionately to what I could otherwise do, and the same. So that's what we're working towards. We have a few advantages with that. Beetle and Jalen have known each other for years. They have been working together on our NBA product for many years, and they are very close friends. And I have worked with Jalen over the years many times. I describe working with Jalen Rose as being like riding a bucking bronco, which is to say you give up immediately on the notion you're going to steer it where you want it to go. And instead, you were just holding on for dear life, hoping not to be thrown. And then Beetle she's like a force of nature. So we've had a fabulous time, and the energy of it, I think, is terrific. And today was a great example. You touched on it, but we had Ice Cube in our studio. He and I grew up together, and then we had Nick Foles in our studio, and you could not have two more different conversations. Yeah. You could not have two more different vantage points to come from. and you've got Ice Cube and Jalen, like spitting rap lyrics back and forth at each other, and then you've got Beetle and Nick Foles playing cornhole, which she won, by the way. And so it was a really fun, and that's what we're trying to be. And that's the kind of thing that doesn't happen like that. It's just not meant to. Anyone who expected it to happen like that didn't have any understanding of what it was we were trying to do. So far it has been great fun, and I anticipate it will continue to be.
The stat that we're most excited about on the business side, and I know you know this, Mike, but 30% of the people that are watching the show are totally new to that time period for ESPN, and they're 10 years younger than what was there before. So for us, we feel we're on the right track. It's going to take a little while, and I think football will help. The NBA helped while we had the NBA. We lost it relative to the final sooner than we would have liked, as has been documented. But that, I think, is telling. We're starting to find an audience, and it's more female, which we like. And morning television, to your point, it is a ritual, and people, to break into their ritual, you have to really attract a new audience in many ways rather than convert people that are watching what they are. And I think that's what's happening. We're attracting a new audience, so we're excited that that's...
Yeah, there was an expression that I learned when we started Mike and Mike, which, as you mentioned, we were just announced we're going into the National Radio Hall of Fame. We were almost canceled our first year. No one actually talked about canceling us, but the world gave up on us. This will never work. Nationally syndicated sports in the morning will never work. And there is an expression in our industry called letting it bake. You just have to leave us on. We were just two guys. We had our own chemistry. We had our thing. And you have to allow that to become a part of people's habit. The morning, as you just touched on, and I'll expand on it a little, is people's routine. That's generally speaking not a time people will get up and watch something on Netflix. That is a time that you want to be tethered to the planet. You want to know what's going on. You want to have some connection to what's happening in the world. And if you are particularly interested in sports, then ESPN is, generally speaking, the first destination. But it will take a little time for people who for 40 years have gotten up and seen SportsCenter there to get used to something new. It's not an enormous departure. We're still doing highlights. We're still doing stats and scores. We're still giving you analysis and some opinion and some fun. But it is our own version of it, and that's just going to take a little time for people to become accustomed to. And I think that you are going to see it like a good stock. You don't want a stock to go like this because the other side of this is this, but it can grow this steadily. Yep. Mike and Mike did, and I'm sure this will. Which then brings us, I think, to the next factor, and I'm sure there are a lot of people here who are newer in the industry and breaking in and trying to find ways to go. There's so much talk about the way people consume television today, yep. And obviously with so much of it being on demand. The power, I think, more than ever before, the power of a live sporting event, I think, has increased in recent yep. years. Because I know when I'm watching a game, more than at any other time, I feel like if you're on social media and you're interacting with people, you feel like the entire world is watching in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that there's practically anything else in television that works that way.
Well, not when you don't know the ending.
Right.
And obviously, I think more and more folks that produce, let's call it television, are producing it in different genres besides sports. I think of the Walt Disney Company, whether you're a Bachelorette or a Proposal or a Bachelor fan. In many cases, of course, that while it is taped to live, if you will, in terms of the outcomes and things of that ilk. So what I do believe is starting to happen now is there is a huge audience of people, particularly younger, and let's call it whether you want to say it's millennial or you want to say it's Gen Z or whichever marketing phrase you want to use, that watches the game through a wide variety of ways besides just watching the game. And that is how they would watch it might be highlights only. That might be how they watch it. And the currency of knowing when that is happening, the conversation that goes on. We've got a bunch of research now that kind of shows there's a group in the middle that watches the game, then there's a group that's before the game, essentially, and a group that's after the game. And they might dip in and out to the live game based upon kind of what they're doing and how they're doing it and where they are in their life, and technology's allowed us to do that. The opportunity for marketers, advertisers, fans, pick some part of the food chain, is to figure out where do you appropriately now put messaging? Where do you appropriately talk about brands? How do they show up? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what Mike and he has done, and obviously in radio for a long time, but how do brands show up so they feel like they're there and they should be there, as opposed to they're interrupting the conversation. We're lucky in sports. We have natural breaks in many cases, but as you guys know, in a sport like football/soccer, which is going on right now, there aren't breaks, and you have to figure out other ways to have sports show up, whether that be in the background or through what talent may or may not say appropriately. So I think that's the next wave of excitement for us. We have the live product. We know that it works. We know that people consume it in lots of different ways. Where do we find the right mix of advertising and commercials that feel like they should be authentically there? Because the consumer, what we do know, is they will not stand for stuff the way they used to. They just won't. And advertisers won't, of course, invest against that. So we think that's a big opportunity for live, and in particular, live programming like Get Up and others that we have clearly on ESPN, because you can help make the brands authentic.
Absolutely right. So that in studio programming, that is a similar challenge, but the execution of it, I think, looks completely different. What we strive to do is to organically connect our messaging, or your messaging, the messaging of our business partners, with our audience in a way that does not ever feel like we are stopping what we are doing, delivering that message, and then going back to what we are doing. It is not, and now a word from our sponsor. That word has to be seamlessly integrated into what we are doing so that we are delivering these messages without beating people over the head with it. Most of the time, those messages are being delivered in ways that people don't even know. So whether it is having an iPad on your desk, or whether it is, we did this fabulous promotion with Scott's, the turf company, where we built an actual small grass field on the Heineken River Deck, which is downstairs from our new studios at Pier 17. And we would just go down there and do a segment from there. And we were just doing what we would normally do. We're talking about basketball or baseball or football or whatever it may be, but we're sitting on this grass field and we have some of the Scott's signage around us and a little read on the end of it as a button. And it's just a nice way to deliver a message with, I think, the consumer never feeling like they're being sold something. It is a message that's being delivered at least partly subliminally. It's not off-putting. And over the course of time, again, it's not something that I think sells something in that moment, but it is something that over the course of time develops a familiarity to where all of a sudden people say, oh yeah, that's the product I know. If I'm in the market for something like that, because I hear about it on Get Up, or in the old days, they would hear about it on something like Mike and Mike. And many of you may not be aware that you were in the presence of football royalty here, all right? So, I mean, going all the way back, that your dad, in my childhood, your dad was an extraordinarily well-known football coach at North Dakota State and then the NFL with the Patriots, the Giants, the Jets, the Steelers. So where does that leave you at this point? You are like the ultimate football fan. Where does that leave you now when it comes to all of this all these years later?
Well, people often ask me what's my favorite team, and my favorite team, of course, is Nielsen, because I root for close games. And I did grow up, my dad's Ron Earhart, and was around, professional sports for a long time. So sports was always a business to me and to the family. So I didn't know you were going to do that plug, but thank you. And I think it is interesting now in watching one of our 30 for 30s, Bill and Bill, to see that repertoire, that went back and forth for the two of them, and to know that my dad worked with both of them and knew them both quite well, and to then watch versions of footage on that, and there I would see, my father on the sideline standing next to Bill calling plays, and that was always kind of a unique thing. And I wish you'd been able to see it these past a number of years, but thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, the Bill, for you, those of you who didn't see it, that's one of our best 30 for 30s. The two Bills, Big Bill, Bill Parcells, and Little Bill, as they were known, Bill Belichick. And that brings us, I think, to a final thought here, and then we wanted to make sure we set aside some time for questions, because I see a lot of young people in here. I'd love to be able to answer any questions that you may have about the business side of things or the content side of things, but the emotional side. Sports is a business, but it is a business that's built in emotion. We care about this stuff because we grow for whatever reason, whether it's you grow up with it the way you did, or I grew up with it the way I did in my family, where sports was just the currency of conversation. My parents were the biggest sports fans. My mother would have left my father for Joe Namath. And my father would have thought that was a fantastic idea. So we grew up with it similarly, though differently. So how about the emotional piece? Where does that play into the business side? How does that factor into what we do in your area?
Well, I think we have to create, marketing and advertising, which we do for ESPN, and I think do extraordinarily well. For those of you that know that this is SportsCenter campaign, which I hope most of you do, that whimsical effort is actually the single longest running advertising campaign in the advertising business. It's run over 450 commercials since 1995. And it's a wonderful ode and a wonderful way to emote and create positive emotion around sports. And I think that is so important now, whether it be in how we cover the games, how we talk about the games, and most importantly, I think on the business side, how you then have your brand show up and create emotional connections that matter to consumers. And I think that, again, the thing that is clear is the consumer is really no dummy by any means. They know good advertising. I think we all know this. When you see and are watching any part of a game or a television program or something on your phone or something on your desktop or whatever it might be, you know when it's a new ad. Your brain automatically knows, I haven't seen that. And it immediately tunes in quickly. Now, how long it tunes in after that, when it's seen it many, many times, another story, and there's all kinds of studies about that. But that whole idea of creating an emotional connection with a brand that's, whether it's in the content or it feels like it should be there, that's the most exciting thing I think that can happen in our business. And I do think we collectively are going to figure out how to take emotional advertising and have it connect to commerce. And we're going to move from both brand, which is telling that story and creating a relationship, to places using technology that will allow us all to participate in that food chain. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the press and also obviously here about, sports betting and gambling and all that, and we're at the very infancy of that, obviously. But that's just one place that when you think about just sports, that commerce can occur. Tickets is where commerce can occur. Travel, sports travel is a huge opportunity now. People absolutely create environments and create excursions around going to see spring training, or for that matter, going to Vegas,
Oh, yeah.
which is all part of kind of a lifestyle thing. So there's nothing now more important, we think, than how the emotion of the experience impacts the way that people consume the game or consume how the game is covered.
Yeah, and I think there's also an element at a time where things feel particularly uneasy sometimes in the overall political and social discourse in our country, that the escapism that sports provides has never felt more significant to me. It's never felt more important to me personally to provide that outlet for people. Just put on my TV show, and I'm going to talk to Nick Foles about football, and I'm going to talk to Ice Cube is going to have some fun with us, and Michelle Beadle and I are going to argue over something that is so completely insignificant. I wrote in my first book that the beauty of sports is that there's nothing in the world better than investing absolutely everything into something that means absolutely nothing. And I think that has never been more relevant than it feels right now. So we've got a few minutes left, and we wanted to make sure that we set aside some time for some questions. So I don't know if folks want to stand up. Do we have, I'm not sure if we have, yeah, there we go. There's some lights, and we've got some people over here. So we'll get a microphone over there.
Hi, over here. So I'm actually a recent undergraduate this past month, and I was here for the first day, and I heard Steve Stout and the following ESPN panelists, I think Katie Nolan was the one to say it, but the first conversation, Steve Stout said, if you have a target audience that you're going for, you need to have that audience working within internally. And then, which I thought was, very significant. And that next conversation was for the Katie Nolan from ESPN. And she said that she was responsible for engaging with the younger audience and the upcoming generation. But she admitted herself that sometimes she makes connections to 80s movies, and her producer has to kind of hold her back and say that's not really relevant conversation. And so for me, as a millennial, I was wondering how ESPN is preparing for my generation and how you're going to keep our attention and keep moving forward with ESPN and the sports content that you guys provide, but also making it more familiar and something that millennials and the next generation will be coming back for.
Sure. Well, I think I mentioned Snapchat as an example of that we produce daily programming with people like Katie. She's one of the faces of Snapchat. I think we announced in this year's Upfront 7 new live shows with Twitter. We've got a pretty robust relationship and activity on Instagram. So I think what's changed for us is maybe before we used to take the shows and then basically just put them in those environments or versions of them, and truthfully we had to create stuff natively in that environment, and by the way, have it be created by people that are of the age. And I think I agree with Steve 100%. If you don't have people in a diverse environment relative to how you create content or how you market it or whatever the case may be, then you're not going to be able to reach that audience and you're not going to be authentic to them. So I think we have to continue to evolve and change, and you need folks from all walks of life as well as all kinds of life to be able to be current and authentic as you go. And I also think you have to be open. You know, we had a long history of doing things very successfully at ESPN, and in the last couple of years we've gone through a significant amount of change relative to how we've wanted to show up with new programming, new content, new ideas. So for me, unless you're thinking about what's new every day and reaching out to people around you every day, then you're missing the boat. So that's, I think, a big part of what we're trying to do. And that, interestingly enough, we reach out to our own employees significantly. We have groups that are at different segments, different age groups, whatever it might be, and we reach to them. We ask them, tell us whether we're on the right track or not. Obviously, you can do a lot of research as well, and we do that. But there's a whole bunch of ways to, I think, stay not only current, but to lead. And I think that's the thing. Can you help lead? And that's what we've always tried to do at ESPN. What else?
So Ed, this is another question for you. On the business side, sorry, where are you seeing VR and AR from a business?
I think that they're both technologies that are going to help make the viewing of sports, the consuming of sports, better. And that's, clearly really important. There's so many ways that they can come in and make a difference relative to fan experience. I think at the moment we're still a little struggling with scale, right? How does this scale? There's no question that it has great content possibilities with it, but it still remains a little tough, particularly on the business side, to have it be more than a shiny object at the moment. I do think that in particular now, you kind of think about what's happening with esports and e-gaming and all of what's going on in that area. That in many ways has great opportunity for both of those. And one of the things that's really interesting about those both of those concepts, AR, VR, and then putting that in with esports or e-gaming, is much of the e-gaming and esports world is less so about team and more so about individual, right? And I think it's a funny thing. We, began the X Games 25 years ago, and that was a sport and a lifestyle that we created that in many ways, if it had been created 5 years ago, it would have been very current relative to the current distribution models that are out there. But because it was started at a time when the internet didn't exist, it never really developed a big audience because it wasn't shareable. The only way you could find it would be on television for a long time. So I think about what you just asked and said, how do you create this notion of progression? Because that's what a lot of esports and e-gaming and AR and VR are about. Experiences that you can progress in. And it isn't necessarily that your team wins, it's that you win. And I think that, for me, is how do you then create scale with progression. And we're spending a lot of time thinking about experience and then how that young athlete, but that athlete isn't necessarily someone stick and ball. That's someone that can play a computer game like nobody else can. And also that competes against other people as opposed to other teams. So, thank you.
It's a good question. I think we have time for one more.
Mike,
There's one. I see one. Yeah.
Up here to your right here.
Yeah.
Mike, you talked about that, you've been at ESPN for 21 years, so obviously you've built a very recognizable personal brand. And that's something they tell, at least me as a student still trying to build my own brand, that you have to cut out a piece for yourself in the industry when you try to get into it. What sort of advice would you give a student like me to try to build that brand?
It's the right question to ask. And what I would say is you cannot go into this trying to build a brand. You have to go into this trying to be authentically yourself and hope that that's going to work. The overriding piece of advice, there's only one thing that every single person who's interested in being a broadcaster has to do, and that is to be authentically him or herself. And that does not guarantee you that you will succeed, but if you do not do it, you are absolutely guaranteed not to. And the reason I say that is because if you want to do something like what I do, which is at this point we're live 15 hours a week. On Mike and Mike we were live 20 hours a week. You can fake something for 30 minutes a week. Something that's taped, you can put on a character, you can do that sort of thing. When you are just reacting to every single thing that happens in every moment, If you're going to do it well, then you cannot be thinking, what do I want my personality to be right now? What do I want my brand to be? You just have to be who and what you are and hope that that resonates over the course of time. And I've been fortunate that in some ways it has. And then you have the delightful, you find yourself in the really serendipitous position that sometimes you don't even have to say anything and people get it. A reference will come up to something that involves germs because I'm a little germy, or something that involves golf because I love golf, or any of the things that people immediately associate with me. And all I have to do is smile and everyone kind of knows what I'm thinking. And that only comes from years and years and years of being authentically who and what you are, depending on exactly what it is you're looking to do. But if you go into it saying, okay, I want my brand to be this, then you're never going to get there. You're not going to get there. If you go into it thinking, I'm going to be myself, let's see if a brand develops on the back end of that, then I think you give yourself a fighting chance.
I would just add one thing. I'm lucky enough I get to interview a lot of folks at different levels. Obviously, young people who happen to have parents or connections that want to potentially work at ESPN, and executives all the way up and down the line. And some of them are here that I've had the challenge and opportunity to work with and all that. What I always say is, most people come in and say, I love sports, I would love to work at ESPN. And I say to them, that's great. We really appreciate that you love sports. There are 200 million people in America who love sports. But here's what we would love for you to think about, and that is, how good of a business athlete are you? What I mean by that is, how well do you write? How well do you listen? How well do you manage your boss? How well do you communicate great ideas? Are you good in a meeting? What kinds of things do you do that make you an athlete that can stand out, and at the same time be a great learner? And I think that's something that for those, at least in sports, oftentimes we think about that. We have a lot of ex-athletes at ESPN that work there because they love team, and I think that's another great thing that a great business athlete can be, and that's be not only part of a team but a contributor to a team. And Mike said it before about what happens with folks on air and when he knows it's working, and that is that you make the team better and you make the people around you better. And I think that that's a great opportunity for all of us, and I think I try to make myself better and the people I'm around better every day as well. So that's just a thing to think about. Great business athletes win.
Well, this is a delight. We are out of time. I would love to have continued, because I'm sure the questions would continue to be really interesting. I'm thrilled that there is something like this. I would love for there to have been when I was starting out and I was the age that I see some of you up there are. So thank you very much for having us. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Great. Thank you.